Thank you again for tuning into today's webinar. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Mr. Jeff Solomon with K. Bender Redbaum, and he will introduce our panelists. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. We know that you have so many things you could be doing today, so we're so happy that you were joining us today for Dollars and Cents, and we have a lot of information to get to. So I'm going to introduce our panelists right now, and we're going to go around the room, so to speak. So first, I'd like to introduce from K. Bender Redbaum, one of the few board-certified specialists in condominium and plan development law in the entire state of Florida, Jeffrey Rembaum. Jeffrey, please tell everybody a little bit about yourself and the firm.
I will. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I see people are still coming in to the webinar, so I imagine the slower I speak, the more people that will join us. No, I am teasing, but I'm so glad. You know, the folks that are with us today are really in for a treat because the ink isn't even wet on some of the new legislation that's going to be affecting Senate Bill SD4 that we'll be getting into later today. But first, K. Bender Rembaum, we are a law firm specializing in Florida's community associations and representation of them. We represent around 1,400 associations, give or take. We are in Pompano Beach, Broward County, Palm Beach County, where I'm talking to you from in Palm Beach Gardens. We have an office in Tampa. We have an office in Orlando. About 21 lawyers. 9 of us are board certified in the field. And one of us is also board certified in construction law. We write, we publish, we provide numerous opportunities for board member and manager education each month. I suspect everybody that's already with us already knows about that. Otherwise, you wouldn't probably be with us this morning. I've been published over 300 times on various association matters. I get hired as an expert witness and teach the younger lawyers how to be association lawyers. 2 of my partners have radio shows on, Robert Kay, once a month, Peter Mullengarden, every Monday morning. So we are very active with Tallahassee and legislation and looking out for our clients' interests. So thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you, sir.
And by the way, to my fellow panelists, while I was talking, 21 people joined us. So I'll be tracking how many people joined because of you.
Speak slowly. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. Good morning. And now we want to go around the room to Timothy Marshall. Timothy is from AT Design. Timothy, a little bit about yourself, your firm, and take it away.
Thank you very much. Tim Marshall. I'm the president of AT Designs. We're a structural engineering firm located in North Palm Beach, Florida. Our firm specializes in building evaluations, structural engineering, forensic engineering. We do a lot of expert witness work. We have also done a lot of windstorm mitigation and litigation support work, concrete restoration. We also are considered window experts for the replacement of glazing in condominiums, have done multiple jobs in that. And we also do essentially anything related to the exterior facade of the building, roof consulting, things of that nature. And I'm very excited about being a part of this and hopefully it'll be very informative with a great team that you guys have compiled.
Thank you very much, Timothy. Timothy, right back at you. And now we want to turn it over to our representative today from the Castle Group, one of the premier management companies on the entire planet, Kelly Britton. Kelly, please take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Kelly Britton with Castle Group, and we are the property managers who work alongside all these lovely industry experts to maintain a safe community. I've been with Castle many years and oversee our business development and have worn many hats in operations, so have played the role of your property manager in the recent past.
Well, thank you very much, and a very pleasant good morning or good afternoon now to you. And lastly, before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's event, we have Greg Main-Bally from Colliers, as well as Jeremy Caldwell, also from Colliers. So Greg, please take it away. Tell us a little bit about your firm and yourself.
Good afternoon. Greg Main-Bally with Colliers. I manage the Southeast markets for Colliers from a construction management aspect here in Florida. We have offices here in South Florida, Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties, as well as Fort Myers, Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville. We have 20 project managers spread throughout the state of Florida who help and execute construction management assignments across Fortune 500 assets, as well as a multitude of multifamily condos going up and down the Florida coastline, especially now affected by the SIRS and Milestone inspection study. So we insert a project management professional alongside your asset and alongside your property and assist you through the capital planning of the new legislation that is now taking place.
Jeff,
Okay.
I'm going to jump in and add that in addition to Castle being one of the finest residential community association management companies out there, in addition to Tim Marshall, AT Designs, being truly one of the finest engineering firms I've had the pleasure of working with here in Palm Beach County, and Colliers, both for commercial building representation, but of course, and management, but also for the services they are providing to our high rises in and around South Florida, due to the phase 2 milestones and the required work and what comes out of them. As you're going to hear later on during today's webinar, the importance of having someone like Jeremy and Greg on your team, I just can't emphasize it enough. And you're going to find out why in just a few minutes. So we're very blessed to have you all from Colliers with us today as well.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks to everybody for being here. This is going to be wonderful. And as Eric mentioned earlier, this will be recorded, so this will be available soon on our social media platforms. We will all be sharing this. So we want to get right into this today. There's a lot going on, and back in the 80s, one of my favorite wrestlers back in the 80s in the WWF back then was Roddy Piper. And one of the things he used to say was, just when they think they have the answers, I change the questions. And that is the perfect segue for Jeffrey Rumbaum today. He's going to go over the Senate bill, the glitches, and what was proposed legislation, but I understand now might not be so proposed anymore. We have some news fresh off the presses today, correct?
It's getting very real and very serious. I had hoped to spend some time going over Senate Bill SD4 and the requirements as they stand today. But given the complexity of the questions we've received in advance, I think we have a very advanced group with us today. So we don't need to rehash the existing requirements of the Milestone and Structural Integrity Reserve Study. Instead, we have a bill, and there's been bills in the House and there's been bills in the Senate, all dealing with changes to Senate Bill SD4 and all of its implications. Now it is, as it winds its way through the legislative sausage factory in Tallahassee, everybody needs to focus on Senate Bill 154. This is the combination of House Bill 1395 and has now been morphed and transitioned to some of those issues that were being dealt with in the House bill are now in the Senate bill. The Senate bill has found its way through the Committee on Fiscal Policy and Regulated Industries. It is sponsored by Senators Bradley and DeSigli. I'm probably pronouncing that last one incorrectly, but again, if you go to the Florida Senate homepage, very top of the screen, type in SB 154 in the search bar, you will get the latest legislation. It might change a little bit, but it's getting very close to final from the sources I'm hearing from anyway in general. So we're going to talk about the high points of how this legislation changes what we already know about our Milestone and Structural Integrity Reserve Studies. In some areas, there's been some significant changes. In other areas, there has been some clarification. And appreciate the legislature's effort on providing the necessary clarity on so many of the issues. In reading through some of these changes, I will give a shout out to Barry Subcow, who's probably listening, because he has been on a one-man life's mission to make sure some of these issues in Senate Bill SD4 get resolved, and people do listen to him, and then they carry what he's saying, and then they have a little bit more education so that when they're in Tallahassee talking with the senators and the folks in the House, they come at it from a position of knowledge. So thank you for everything that you're doing out there. The milestone inspection is no longer about the service life of the building. So milestone used to be about the service life of a building. Now we have clarity that it's about the actual quote unquote life of the building. It's not the service life, it's the actual life So in the very beginning, in chapter 553, which is where we start with the milestone, we have a change that the legislature finds that maintaining structural integrity of reserve throughout the life of the building is of paramount importance. Of course, it's only about paramount importance if you are in a residential building. As you'll see, some of these changes no longer, there's clarity that they may not apply to the commercial associations that are out there. I'm not sure why that distinction is there other than a strong lobby on behalf of the commercial associations, but you would think that the legislature would care equally regarding the age of the building without really examining who works in or lives in the building. So just food for thought. Maybe it'll take a commercial disaster before the legislature then swings into gear to protect business type buildings as well. Okay, so we have a change to what the milestone inspection means. And it means a structural inspection of a building, including the inspection. Remember, it used to say load-bearing walls. Now it says load-bearing elements. So that's a significant change to remove the word wall and go into the load-bearing elements. So that's important. The milestone can be prepared by a team of professionals, but still needs the architect or engineer acting as the registered design professional. And in the proposed legislation, remember, this is proposed, it's not law until the governor signs it into law, or after 15 days after it's presented on his desk. If he doesn't veto it, it also can become law. But first, it's got to get through the legislative sausage grinder, and it's getting close. The milestone inspection services may be provided by a team of professionals with an architect or engineer acting as the registered design professional, responsible and charged with all of the work and reports signed and sealed by the appropriate qualified team member. Substantial structural deterioration means substantial structural distress, or, and here's a new term coming in, substantial structural weakness that negatively affects the building's structural condition and integrity. So no longer is it just about structural distress, but it's also about structural weakness as well. There were issues as to what is 3 stories. How do we measure the 3 stories? Well, thank you, legislature. If this becomes law, we have clarity. An owner or owners of a building that is 3 stories or more in height, here comes the magic language, as determined by the Florida Building Code. So how do we know if your building, if it's 3 stories and you're not sure because you have an underground parking garage and maybe 2 stories above it, is that 3 stories or not? Well, we're going to have to go to the Florida Building Code, and I will rely on Tim and Greg perhaps, and maybe Jeremy, to address that issue if you have time and can do so, as to how the Florida Building Code actually measures the stories of a building. I think that would be interesting for our listeners. If the building reaches 30 years of age before December 31st, 2024, the initial milestone inspection must be performed before December 31st, 2024. The 3 miles of the coastline, remember that you had to have your milestone completed within 25 years of the CO if your CO was coming up on 25 years of age, and now it's a little bit different. The local enforcement agency may determine that local circumstances, including environmental conditions such as proximity to salt water, require that the milestone inspection must be performed by December 31st of the year in which the building reaches 25 years of age. Based on the date, the certificate of occupancy for the building was issued, and every 10 years thereafter. Here's where it gets interesting. We have extension of deadlines, inspection reports before July 1st, 2022. So if you were precipitous and you already did your milestone, if you will, prior to July 1st, 2022, and we're going to talk about mixed use buildings. First, the extension of the deadline. Local enforcement agency may extend the date by which the initial milestone inspection must be completed upon a showing of good cause by the owner or owners of the building that the inspection cannot be timely completed. if the owners have entered into a contract with the architect or engineer to perform the milestone inspection, and the inspection cannot reasonably be completed before the deadline. Remember, there was quite a bit of chatter about there aren't enough professionals in the state to lend their services, architects and engineers, to perform the milestone inspections in a timely fashion. As long as you're engaged now with the engineer or architect for that purpose, then you can make application to extend the deadlines. The local enforcement agency may accept an inspection report prepared by the licensed engineer or architect for the structural integrity and condition inspection of a building performed before July 1st, 2022, if the inspection report substantially complies with the requirements of this section. Interesting to ask the question, what happens if the report was prepared on July 2nd, 2022, as compared to July 1st? So I think there will be some people, I'm just curious why the legislation focuses on July 1st, 2022, rather than just saying something far simpler. So if you're listening out there, anybody in the legislature, hopefully somebody out there is listening, right? The exception really for anyone who's already done their milestone, the legislation should not tie it to a date. It should just say if you've done your milestone report prior to the requirements set out in the legislation. That would give a lot more flexibility to those who have also done those requirements after July 1st, 2022. Milestone inspection must be arranged by a condominium or cooperative association and any owner of any portion of the building that is not subject to the condominium or cooperative form of ownership. So we're talking about a mixed use building. I'll give you a great example. A 50-story tower where that is maybe the first floor, second floor, but not the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth floor are subject to Florida Condominium Act. But those the third, fourth, fifth, sixth floor were exempted, if you will, and are not subject to the declaration of condominium. So a vertical subdivision that actually excludes portion of the vertical building from the residential condominium. How was that building supposed to effectuate the milestone and structural integrity reserve study? Who pays for it? What parts of the building were subject to it were great questions. The legislature now has addressed that for us if this bill becomes law. So that's what that section is dealing with. The condominium association or cooperative and any owner of any portion of the building that is not subject to the condo regime form of ownership is responsible for ensuring compliance. So that is a good thing. We have cost apportionment. The condominium association co-op is responsible for all costs associated with the milestone inspection attributable to those portions of the building which the association is responsible to maintain under the governing documents. We have notice to owners of the non-condominium, non-cooperative portions of the building. So there are new requirements that when you get the milestone inspection, in addition to having to provide a copy to the local government, post it on the property, provide it to the owners, et cetera, and so forth, if you have any owner of the portion of the building not subject to the condo, you are now required to provide them a copy of the report as well. So now it's keeping everybody in. If the phase 2 inspection is required, then within 180 days of after submitting the phase 1 inspection report, the architect or engineer performing the phase 2 inspection must submit a phase 2 progress report to local government within the timeline for completion of the phase 2 inspection. So Tim, Greg, you have some new requirements to look out for as well, because now you have an interim report that needs to be a progress report that needs to be provided to local government within the 180 days. We have changes as to who the reports must be provided to, time to provide the milestone inspection deadline to the unit owners, where to send and deliver the reports to. The report needs to be provided as well to the unit owners, local government, et cetera, and to any other owner in the building. So if you have an owner in the building and the entire building is not subject to the condominium form of ownership, once again, then those owners must be provided a copy of the report. The unit owners, shareholders, if you will, the shareholders of the cooperative, the unit owners of the condominium, must be provided a copy of the milestone within 30 days after receiving the applicable inspection report. And number 3, where do you send or deliver the report? So we now have additional clarity that it needs to be provided to the owners at their official mailing address, property address, or any other address provided by the owner to fulfill the association's notice requirements, etc. You can also, there's options, electronic transmission to the email address if that person opted into receiving their official communications via email from the association. We now have new requirements for the Florida Building Commission. By December 31st, 2024, the Florida Building Commission must adopt rules pursuant to various statutes to establish a building safety program for the implementation of this section within the Florida Building Code. So we're going to see some changes to the Florida Building Code as a result of the required milestone inspections. The building inspection program must at a minimum include inspection criteria, testing protocols, standardized inspection reporting forms that are adaptable to an electronic format, and record maintenance requirements for the local authority, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Interesting, at the very end of the milestone section, we have some changes to Citizens Property Insurance Corporation. Remember that a lot of people think that Citizens is the insurer of last resort. Well, not exactly. They don't have to write the insurance if they deem they don't want to write that insurance. So they're not mandatorily obligated to write the policy. Just be aware of that, please. In any event, except as otherwise provided, the corporation, meaning the association, shall require securing and maintaining a flood insurance as a condition of coverage of personal lines, residential risk. So there are requirements to have flood insurance. Excuse me one moment, we'll hang that up. I'm not going to go into tremendous detail there. We will leave that for another webinar and we can talk all about the flood insurance requirements, but it does seem to apply to the H06 policies, the individual owner policies, more so than the condominium association policy. And there are exemptions as well for those requirements. And I just think they're trying to, the state is trying to provide for more owners to have the necessary flood insurance, because if you don't have flood and you go through a storm and you get wet, you know what's going to happen is the primary carrier is going to deny coverage, saying you should have had, you know, this is a flood claim. So you really want to have both pieces, and the flood insurance really is not all that expensive typically for a residential H06 policy owner compared to not having it. So living in swamp land that has been filled in, I mean the state of Florida, you really want to think about having flood insurance if you don't have it. Now, let's turn to some of the changes for the structural integrity reserve studies. We have alternate funding methods. So we have some new definitions we need to go through. So there's an alternate funding method for calculating reserves if you can get it approved by the Division of Condominium, but it only applies to a multi-condominium association operating at least 25 condominiums. Please do not ask me, Jeff, we have 24 condominiums. Can we qualify for this? No, you can't. So what is a multi-condo association? Let's assume you have one board of directors. So that means you have one set of articles of incorporation. You have one set of bylaws for how that company, your association, operates, but you have 25 or more individual sets of declarations of condominium. Each declaration governs that building. If you have 25 or more, then you can apply to the division for an alternative funding method of the structural and of all your reserves, really. So that option is out there. I don't know how many condominium, I'd be curious to know really how many multi-condos are out there that are operating more than 25. I'm familiar with a couple that have 22 and 23, but I'm not familiar with any that have 25 or more. So that's sort of a strange exemption, and I wonder if we will see additional changes there. Structural integrity reserve study used to have a big, long definition associated with it in the legislation. Now it simply means a study of reserve funds required for future major repairs and replacement of the condominium property performed as required in 718, section 112. And then there's a similar provision for the cooperatives inside of chapter 719 that governs the cooperatives. And now we continue to page 20 as we keep going through our legislation. Getting there, folks, getting there. We have structural integrity reserve study budget requirements. Inflation is addressed. Waiver is addressed. In a budget adopted by an association required to have the structural integrity reserve study, reserves must be maintained for the items identified in subparagraph G. What is subparagraph G? By way of refresher, it is roof, load-bearing walls, and other primary structural members, floor, foundation, fireproofing, plumbing, electrical systems, waterproofing and exterior painting, windows, and any other item with deferred maintenance expense or replacement cost that exceeds $10,000. So those are our little G items. So in the budget adopted by the association that's required to have the structural integrity reserve study, referring to those condominium buildings 3 stories or higher, reserves must be maintained for the items identified, which we just discussed, and the reserve amount for such items must be based on the findings and recommendations of the most recent structural integrity reserve study. With respect to items for which, and this will be important to both, to you, Tim, I think, and maybe to you as well, Greg, with respect to items for which an estimate of the useful life is not readily ascertainable, an association must reserve the amount of deferred maintenance expense, if any, which is recommended by the structural integrity reserve study for those items. Interestingly, inflation adjustments can be made when you're doing your reserve calculations. The members of a unit owner controlled association can determine by majority vote of all of the voting interests of the association, not a majority of a quorum, a majority of all, to waive out of the reserves. But of course, but again, when you keep reading the legislation, I first got excited when I read this. They were implementing the opportunity to waive out if the group wanted to, if the members wanted to, but that's still not going to apply to your little G items. For a budget adopted on or after December 31st, the members of a unit owner controlled association that must obtain a structural integrity reserve study may not determine to provide no reserves or less reserves as required by the subsection, except for the multi-condo association that has 25 or more declarations of condominium. It's the best way to explain it. Then they can opt into the alternative funding method, whatever that may later mean, as approved by the Florida Division of Condominium. So there are hoops to jump through for sure. Now, what about using reserves for a different purpose? There was tremendous questions as to whether or not the items in little g could be used for another purpose or not, et cetera. So we have some clarity. For a budget adopted on or after December 31st, 2024, members of the unit owner controlled association that must obtain the structural integrity reserve study can't vote to use the reserves, funds, or any interest thereon for any other purpose other than the replacement or deferred maintenance costs of the components listed in paragraph little g. So if you have straight line reserves, let's say for the roof and the floor, foundation, et cetera, and you now needed to use them for waterproofing and exterior painting and wanted to take a vote of the membership to do that, you can now at least take a vote. Any item that you save money for in little g that isn't in a pool, you can at least now take a vote of the membership to use that money for a different purpose, so long as that purpose is consistent with those items set out in little g that we just discussed. You must have a residential, this is interesting language, structural integrity reserve study. An association must have a residential condominium. Residential must have a structural integrity reserve study completed at least every 10 years for those that are 3 stories or higher, as determined by the Florida Building Code. So that is an interesting change. Who can perform the structural integrity reserve study? Well, the licensed engineer, the licensed architect, or any person who is certified as a reserve specialist or professional reserve analyst by the Community Associations Institute or the Association of Professional Reserve Analysts at a minimum. The structural integrity reserve study must identify each item of the condominium property being visually inspected, state the estimated useful life, estimated replacement cost, or deferred maintenance of each item on the condominium property being visually inspected, and provide a reserve funding schedule with a recommended reserve amount that achieves the estimated replacement cost, deferred maintenance expense of each item being visually inspected. The structural integrity reserve study may recommend that reserves do not need to be maintained for any item for which an estimate of useful life or estimate of replacement cost or deferred maintenance cannot be determined, or the study may recommend a deferred maintenance expense amount for such item. So that's just really interesting changes that the legislature is providing in that regard. More on the notice requirements. We're not going to get into that right now. The failure of a board of administration to obtain the milestone, obtain the structural integrity reserve study, fund the reserves as required, or to make or provide necessary repairs now comes under the legislation for both cooperatives and condominium associations, for which, remember, there are two mechanisms when you have the disputes with your association. I'm not talking about title disputes and things like that. But generally speaking, you had a choice. You could file a petition for arbitration with the Division of Condominium, or, as effectuated by the legislation of a couple years ago, you can opt to go into pre-suit mediation with the other party. And if things don't resolve there, then instead of going to arbitration in Tallahassee through the Division of Condominium, you would then go into the local circuit court for those disputes. Now we have clarity that if the association fails to obtain the milestone, fails to obtain the SEERs, if it doesn't fund the reserves as required, if it doesn't make or provide necessary maintenance, then you're falling into the enforcement provisions set out in both the Condominium and Cooperative Act. But instead of having the option of going to the division arbitration or having to use the pre-suit mediation procedures, you can only use, for those four items I just mentioned, the pre-suit mediation procedures. And then if it doesn't resolve at pre-suit mediation, then the aggrieved party can go to the local circuit court. So it really didn't put the burden on the Division of Condominium in this regard. What it does do, though, is it does create, by putting it under 718.1255, it does create for prevailing party attorney's fees in that section as well. So if an owner brings a case and the owner loses that case, well, that owner is going to be responsible to pay the association's legal fees and costs that came out of that dispute. The pre-suit mediation procedure, it's very simple. The aggrieved party, be it the association or the owner, whoever the aggrieved party is, sends a letter to their opponent, and they set out the nature of the dispute. They follow the language and include the statutory language, and you provide the name of 5 mediators. They have to be Florida Supreme Court certified mediators. Then the other party is obligated to pick one of those 5 within 20 days and provide that notice back to the aggrieved party. Then you schedule the mediation, and the mediation takes place within 90 days. If the other side doesn't respond, then you can go right to circuit court. So if they don't pick the mediator or they just blow off your notice, you can go right to circuit court. And let's say then you lose the case. Well, would you have to pay the other side's prevailing party fees? And the answer is no, because your opponent did not respond to the pre-suit mediation demand. That then means that you have no risk of having to pay prevailing party attorney's fees if you lose in the trial court. So hope everybody grabbed those concepts. We have new post-turnover duties. So a recently built condominium, and we have new post-turnover requirements for maintenance. And essentially, maintenance of the common elements, we already know, is the responsibility of the association, except for maintenance, of course, of the limited common elements that's been assigned to the unit owners in the declaration. The association must provide for maintenance, repair, replacement of the condominium property for which it bears responsibility pursuant to the declaration. After turnover of the association to the owners, the association must perform any required maintenance identified by the developer in the developer reports until the association obtains new maintenance protocols. So that's going to be extremely important in recently turned over condominiums, and only would affect the recently turned over condominiums. Finally, one last little piece of information that comes to the division of condominium. For the 2023-2024 fiscal year, the sum of $1,301,928 in recurring funds and $67,193 in non-recurring funds from the Division of Florida Condominiums. Let's see, they are going to be awarded, if you will, those funds to be appropriated to the Department of Business and Professional Regulation to add 10 full-time equivalent positions with the associated salary rate authorized for the purposes of the implementation of everything that is in this legislation. Whew, that's a mouthful. But what typically happens, right? Everybody pays $4 a door. If you live in a condominium, once a year you have the door tax. Your association, whether you know it or not, has to pay $4 per door. That money was originally intended to fund the division of condominium, but like any legislature might do from time to time, ours in the state of Florida raids those monies and uses those funds rather than for the division of condo, but takes the lion's share of the money and uses it for other legislative projects. At least now they've set aside definitively some monies to help fund the poor division of condominium. It would be a wonderful division if, in fact, the $4 were left sacrosanct for use of the division of condominium only, so that the Florida legislature can't raid those funds and use them for a different purpose. It would be wonderful if we get there one day. So that is your introduction to all of the changes set out to affect Senate Bill SD4 that's already law if Senate Bill 154 goes into law. The end.
Everybody.
And the ink is still wet, by the way. So
yeah, there's going to be a test. I hope you all memorized all that just now.
Sorry about that, everybody. Truly, this was just this particular draft of the bill is less than 48 hours old.
That's amazing, and we thank you for bringing that to us. We know you were probably up all night preparing this too. So if people do want to check on this on their own, can you once more repeat where people can find this? I see that question came up a few times here.
Go to Google, type in Florida Senate homepage. That will bring you to the Florida Senate homepage. At the very top of the screen, you can enter a bill number. You're going to enter 154. So it's Senate Bill 154, and then it will miraculously appear. It will also give you all the legislative history from the initial bill, which committees it went through, and where it is now.
It's good stuff. You drink something. You need that. Thanks, Jeffrey. We now want to turn it over to. We're going to go to Timothy Marshall. Excuse me. Timothy's going to go over a little bit about the milestone report, the building report card. There's a lot of reporting involved. So can you shed some more light onto this and potentially even bring into fruition some of the items maybe Jeff just spoke about as well, and how they tie into everything that is required and what your role is?
Well, thank you very much. And Jeff, great presentation there. I could barely write the notes as fast as you were speaking. So yeah, there is a lot of reports. And the first question I like to answer is about the stories of the building. While you were reading, I was doing some research. I know that there is a underground parking or basement is considered anything less than 12 feet below ground in height. So if you have a 10-foot basement, or if you have a 10-foot underground, whatever, that's not included a story. So it seems to be that the underground is somewhere around 12 feet, and then you do the vertical floors from there. So I just want to answer that. But yeah, the soon-to-be SB 154 has been in the past. SBD4 has been very interesting. We have performed a lot of them, and essentially what I tell my clients that it is a structural report card to the state. We are going to tell the state from the point of a licensed architect or a licensed engineer the condition of the integrity of the building, which requires visual inspection for the phase 1 milestone, and it encompasses all items. What was interesting that I thought when I was prepping for this, I was going load-bearing walls and I was saying load-bearing elements. So you got to hand it to the legislature. They hit the word right on the head. And essentially, a load-bearing element is any element in a structure that takes a load and transfers it either both vertically to the ground or horizontally to another element. So that's a real basic definition. So that is where it is. So in doing this, I think for me, the inspection, the phase 1 is relatively easy. Writing the reports and the detail of the report becomes is more cumbersome, if you will, because they want to get a full description of the building, and then they want you to evaluate the components that you see that has elements. Now, as part of the phase 1, which would turn on or require phase 2, would be if I was to determine, let's say, on the ground floor, we had a lot of cracking between the cast in place elements and the masonry walls, or we had settlement of the ground floor slabs or things of that nature. That would, at the end of my report, we would identify those items, and that may go into a phase 2 milestone or structural inspection, which would then require more specific, potentially destructive testing to determine if there is in fact an integrity issue. I think we all know that, especially in South Florida, that one of the byproducts of the tropical environment is the deterioration of concrete elements. Concrete is really like a dry sponge. It absorbs the moisture. The moisture attacks the internal steel reinforcement. When the steel reinforcement rusts, it expands and cracks a structural element. That does not mean that having a spall on a floor slab or on a balcony edge or on another element means that you have a structural integrity issue. It means that you have to maintain the structure. And that is the differentiation between in a phase 1 saying that we have located or identified multiple areas with spalling or any type of degradation, but it is more than the maintenance type than rather we found 3 columns that have complete cracks through those columns and we need immediate shoring, and this is a structural integrity issue. So again, this structural report card to the state or the municipality or both really is to raise the red light to the building departments and to the state as to the integrity based on a professional opinion. But one of the things that I have run into, and really I've been asked on every time I've talked about this, is the investigation of foundations. Okay, it is a very particular and very focused field. A lot of buildings, the majority of the high-rise buildings in South Florida, maybe not the 3, 4, 5-story, but anything 8 to 10 and above, are all on piles. And essentially, they cast or they pneumatically pound the piles in the ground, and then that sends the foundation. I generally tell my people that if you have a problem with a foundation, generally, you will see it in the exterior facade or the interior building. You will see the result of differential settlement, degradation, things of that nature. Very rare do those things because they're loaded with a tremendous amount of safety factor. They also carry a lot of weight. So if there is any type of movement or shifting, it immediately will crack or certain things will happen to the exterior facade. So that's where that is. All the rest are pretty basic. I think the other issue that is pretty interesting is the windows. The exterior glazing. I'm not going to say windows, exterior glazing. That's sliding glass doors, windows. And I would even say it encompasses the doors, the metal doors, roof doors, exit doors, things of that nature. That is all a fallback from Hurricane Andrew and the hurricane codes that have kind of been incorporated into the structural evaluation of buildings, which essentially means when we get hit with the hurricane, the exterior facade of a building needs to stay intact so we do not have failure of the building. The windows, same thing, older windows, moisture infiltration, failure to be able to, the load. I commonly refer to a building as a piece of Swiss cheese. You got to cover up all the holes in the Swiss cheese to keep it a piece of viable Swiss cheese. So it's important to know that in all the Florida mitigation and things of that nature studies, they want to look for the weakest link, which is the weakest door, the weakest. And unfortunately, on a big high rise, which I've done a lot of window replacement projects to that nature, it really is the weakest link. It's the one or two people that have not done it that really put the building in peril. So they want to make sure that the building envelope is solid. That goes from the foundation cracking, potential foundation issue, cracking exterior glazing, and then, of course, the roofs. I have found in my professional experience is that lately, in the onslaught of what happened at Surfside, is the insurance companies have not been our friends in associations friends. They are coming into properties and looking at, I'm going to say they're focusing on roofs and saying your roof is 20 years old, irregardless of if you've maintained it, irregardless of what type of flat, and generally the flat roofs, what you've done, that they may be holding back, allowing to issue a policy for your roof. And part of this structural report is going to feed right into that. The problem with a phase one milestone, unless you have obvious water infiltration or obvious, billowing of the membrane, unless you do destructive testing or non-destructive testing, it's very difficult to see uplift testing. It's very difficult to determine the roof. So, if in a phase one milestone, I may put down, or it may be put forth that the roof is walked, we do not see any visual deformation or blistering or anything, exposure, breaches, but that doesn't really mean that the roof is, has ability to resist uplift. So that's one of the areas in this report that's very difficult to do a visual inspection. That I would recommend condo associations go forward, because quite frankly, it not only will allow you to determine the viability of roof, to also to help you with insurance in case a storm does come. The other thing that I was interested in the change is the proximity to salt water, not the ocean or the coastline. I thought that was very interesting, and I think that I'm very happy that the board has made these revisions. They seem pretty straightforward. And Barry also, and I've been in contact with Barry. That guy knows more about this than anyone I know. So I texted him while you were talking. I said, "Welcome to the seminar, Barry." So that's really what I have right here. For the phase one, the phase two, really the difference is the phase one's a visual. You're going to give the report card. If there is damage or maintenance issues, you're going to call out that they need to go. The other part that I brought forth is for the association, the phase one is really a step to the state to report the condition of the building. It does not really help the association in compiling a scope of work to fix I'm going to say the maintenance damage. So there's kind of a gap between reporting and having enough information to go out to bid to repair. And that's been one of my biggest issues, not that you have to do it, is that although the association would hire me to write it, I probably will not have enough information to put together a specification package to go to bid to fix the items, which is an additional step in that. So when you're considering doing this or hiring your engineer, you should talk to, or whoever's going to, architect whoever's going to perform it, you should really talk about, knowing that you have some or don't have some, that to quantify the amount of damage, which is another kind of,
So Tim, sorry to interrupt, but just for the layman, are you saying that there are additional steps beyond the destructive testing of the phase 2 that need to be taken in order to actually get to a project?
Well, that would be both the phase 1 and phase 2. If I go to a building and we see standard maintenance and, we note it, and that's what the report requires, it doesn't mean that I go on every balcony or I go in and quantify it, which would be the basis to bid it out. If we see a distressed column or requires shoring or additional testing, that would again be another thing. We would report it. We'd have to test and we would have to quantify the fix. So it's really the phase 1, phase 2. And unfortunately, is that the SB4D is really just a report card to the state, and then you fulfill that requirement and you really don't have the meat to do the work. And
so I guess that's what I'm trying to give the audience, is that you have your visual inspection, your phase 2 destructive, and then the possibilities of there is that you would then go to quantification and design and then out to bid. So there's like almost 4 steps in order to get all the way completely through the process to remediate what may be found in phase 1, phase 2 milestone inspections.
Yes, and that's exactly true. But at the same token, if a board knows or association knows that they have damage, what they do is they do a phase 1 milestone and you do an investigation of the building at the same time. So you're kind of combining both. And quite frankly, if you think about it, if you combine both, then you're going to have all your bases covered. You'll be able to write the report and present it to the state or the municipality. And then if you do have damage, you can go into that phase and go out to bid. So it's been a common misperception of whenever I've talked on these to condominiums.
Yeah, that's why I'm just trying to explain or at least put it out there that those two, what's delineated by the state is only the first 2 steps and probably a 4-step process of actually getting to repair and into a project. But so what most of the audience needs to realize is that once you get to that phase 2 milestone, the likelihood is that will uncover some form of design and some form of capital need.
Absolutely.
Sounds like we are about to segue over to Greg. Tim, how is your presentation going?
I'm okay with it.
Well, before we do that, I want to bring in Kelly for a quick moment here. She's got a few minutes. And Kelly, community association manager, can do all of this, right? You're going to manage all of this. It's all on you. I'm joking, of course. I want to give you a heart attack. Can you please explain a little bit about the role of the manager and maybe some misconceptions of managers' roles in projects of this sort, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Knowledge is being shared so far, and there really are so many roles. And the manager can't do them all. They are not an expert in engineering. They are not an expert in overseeing a contractor with the construction specs. We manage your association, right? So we're a leader for your community, responsible for overseeing the operational, administrative, maintenance, and financial functions of your community. We provide guidance to the board on when and how to select the industry experts for specific projects, such as what many of the boards are facing now with the bill we're talking about today, and the requirements are ever changing. For those of you who know me, I constantly refer to our attorneys to help figure out the language and tell us what it really means. And then we go from there. It is a collaborative effort with multiple industry experts. We're just the boots on the ground day to day, right? We're the liaison for the association between the subject matter experts, like the engineer, the owner's rep. We're going to segue into Colliers perfectly from here. They have specific knowledge for structural needs of the association and can oversee multiple contractors on these major projects. The property manager is going to oversee your day-to-day operations, tending to the residents daily, overseeing the staff, whether it's front desk, maintenance, janitorial, assuring your amenities are in good condition day to day through your property inspections. And those are really surface, right? Is everything in order? Is it clean? Are there no trip hazards? Do we need to call an expert because we see something that we've identified in an inspection that needs a deeper look? maintaining the supervision of your vendors, your landscaping, your pool, all the pretty things that we want to see to keep your property values up. But really, that all comes down to communication. We have to communicate to the community, to the residents, to the board, to keep everybody informed, because all of these vendors, you know, they're going to talk in their language, and then we have to bring it together and explain it to the community. Have the residents be at ease to know what steps are being taken. These are through resident communications. These are through board meetings. And then that budget, you know, I made a couple notes when Jeff was speaking, is the budget is something that your management company helps put together for your board. So we have to work with the attorney to make sure we know what the reserve requirements are. We want to make sure the board's in compliance, protect the association, protect the board, make sure that you're properly budgeting for deferred maintenance, day-to-day operational items, and then, you know, again, calling in whether it's a CPA, whether it's capital funding needed, and going through those processes. So we do a lot, but it's really to guide the board into the proper directions and the day-to-day, make the residents comfortable in their homes.
So you would say that's fantastic. So you would say the manager is more like a quarterback or an offensive coordinator if we were a sports team, correct?
I love that one, being a sports fan myself, yes.
I have to jump in there because the manager might be the coordinator, but they are not a construction expert. And so many associations have expectations of their on-site manager that are not based in reality.
Right.
They think that, and I run into this all the time, they don't understand the need for bringing in the requisite experts and say, no, we have a manager, they can manage our $1 million contract, $1 million concrete restoration project. With very rare exception, no, they can't, nor should they. First, I guarantee you there would be an exclusion in the management contract for providing that type of service, even if you roped the manager into it. Sometimes managers find themselves roped into that circumstance unwillingly, and it's just so unfair and so unfortunate to put that burden on your local manager. They are there as exactly as Kelly described. But once you hear the services that Greg is about to explain to us, you will begin to understand why being a licensed community association manager, despite the training, despite the 2 9-hour days that you spend in a room to acquire the necessary skill set, you go study, then you take a test, and you are a licensed manager. So much of the licensed manager's abilities come from their life experience and also come from the training they get when they're associated with such an excellent company such as Castle. But to put the burden to manage construction projects on someone who really, in all likelihood, should not be doing it is really a disservice to your entire building, especially when you're dealing with the complexity of change orders and the financial calculations that go into place, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll let Greg kick it off from here with that little segue, because I really want to protect our managers, because I have not seen this many construction projects. I have been dealing with construction contracts, like multi-million-dollar construction project construction contracts for the last, ever since the Senate Bill SD4 came out, and they're increasing more and more each month. So we really need to get Greg's services and companies like that offer the services that Greg does into the marketplace, and boards, you need to be aware, and you need to pick up the phone, and you need this added service. You absolutely do.
Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate that segue. So to give some context, we entered the multifamily management game. And what I mean by that is the construction management game about 5 years ago, mostly due in Dayton Broward due to the existing 40 and 50-year certification process, which requires both structural and electrical compliance. And that really is across all asset types. Now, you heard Jeff earlier explain that there's a slight division between commercial and residential in the build. And from the commercial aspect and side of the business, Colliers itself, we don't do any residential property management. We leave that to the companies like Castle and KW and First Service and all those groups out there. And property management is a thankless job. Yes, you can get a license easily, but if you look in the commercial world, Colliers itself, my division, is responsible for handling anything permit related or capital permit related across our portfolio. Now, to give you an idea, the Colliers portfolio here in Florida is about 60 million square feet of Class A asset across probably 200 buildings. And we have property managers at each of those assets, but it's a very different environment because you might only have 2 or 3 tenants per commercial asset, not 10 different residential condos or 20 or even 300 in some buildings. And the reason I bring that up is because managing those residents is a full-time job by itself. When you look at the commercial environment and the number of tenants or residents our employees have to deal with, it's far greatly reduced. And we still expect them to manage that asset like a 5-star product. So from that perspective, when a permit is pulled or a capital improvement is needed, a roof replacement, an elevator modernization, a lobby modernization, a common area modernization, bathrooms, whatever it is, whether it's the facade of the building, the window, the glazing, technically in the commercial world, Colliers, CB, JLL, the whole bit, they look to their construction management teams because they don't want the liability of that license resting on the property manager who's not licensed for that liability. So in the commercial environment, we are there to attach a project management office and a project management professional who's used to the legalities, the contracts, the structure, the scoping, finding the right consultants to execute and administer the requirements of the local municipality. Now, in Dayton Broward, the 40 and 50 year was structural and electrical, which means you need a structural engineer like Tim and then an electrical engineer as well in order to facilitate and meet the mandates of that local environment. So, 5 years ago, we got into the multifamily business because we realized that Castle and groups like that really needed the assistance of a professional that does this on a daily basis to really help start structuring the capital spend of your assets over a 3 to 5 year term. We were typically being brought in on a roof replacement, a 40-year cert, a concrete restoration project, or something that means after the community had already unknowingly maybe put the cart in front of the horse and hired the wrong professional at the wrong time. So we realized a gaping hole in the market, and we are the only provider that actually services the entire state. So from that perspective, with the new legislation that's just come out in Senate Bill 4D, as well as the reiteration in the last 48 hours that is clarifying some of these things, you're seeing 2 main issues. The first Tim talked about is the Milestone inspection, which is primarily concrete and structure, right? It is a visual and it is implicated on buildings of a particular age that Jeff just mentioned. Now, in that subset of buildings, unless you have just completed a concrete restoration and glazing waterproofing project, the likelihood is that that visual inspection is going to lead into that phase 3 and phase 4 that we were talking about, with some form of repair necessary to the building, whether it's, cracked concrete, delaminating stucco, whatever that story is. And ultimately, you need to realize that the state is really trying to push condominium associations to the same level of maintenance and preventative maintenance that you see in the commercial environment, i.e. Colliers, where we manage these properties. You're seeing those assets held over 5 to 10 year periods, and they're invested in and maintained to a certain level. Otherwise, the investor is not going to get that return on investment. Unfortunately, in the local condo environment throughout the state, you're only maintaining typically your own unit, and not necessarily when you're purchasing, asking about the condition of the roof, the condition of the structure, when the windows were done, whether they were impact, have they been caulked and adequately sealed. And there are multiple components in the building that you as a buyer or a resident really don't understand the useful life or the cost implication of those components. So what has happened with SIRS, which is now the second aspect, and what we call structural integrity reserve study, is the state has actually mandated that a professional architect or engineering firm who has the umbrella or the contractual obligation over mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire, life safety, and any other item above $10,000 worth of value really needs to go into the building and inspect your building from multiple facets, not only the structural components, but all of the other components that make up your building. And if you don't go into this RFP process, eyes wide open and fully aware of what you need to identify and what you need to ascertain and what consultants you need to bring on board to do so, you're going to leave yourself exposed to additional cost in not knowing what those items are. So from that perspective, Colliers is really here to help you RFP for the correct professionals to bring to the property, really help you understand what your capital environment is over that 2 to 3 year term, because once you engage a professional engineer like Tim, and once he has identified issues on your project, we all know, having experienced in the market, that this is not a 30, 60, 90-day process. Unfortunately, this is something that has to be planned, and typically the planning takes a lot longer than the physical execution of the work itself. So, you know, the deadline is approaching fast. We're March, coming up on the end of March 2023. And Jeff, if I'm not mistaken, we need to have already submitted to the city not only Milestone, but also some form of SRRS within the next 18 to 24 months.
Coming up
or at
soon.
least a process towards that.
Coming
So,
up.
yes, sir.
With some of the stuff you heard today, have any of the dates changed? That's a question that's coming up a lot here. Have any of the deadlines changed or anticipated being changed, or are they going to stay the same?
Not that I saw, but the big change is the relief for the association that cannot meet those statutory deadlines of 2024, but has good reason and good cause, especially for the milestone inspection. That they're engaged. You've engaged the requisite professionals, but they can't get to you yet.
That's the big thing. They have to have engaged.
Yes, if you can typically show look, these documents and these requirements, much like the Florida Building Code, are up to the interpretation of the local municipal authority and jurisdiction. Yes, you have to submit them to the state, but ideally the local municipality is going to have the ultimate authority in your local environment. And we've typically seen, even in the Dade County and Dade Broward environments, where 40 and 50 year certifications haven't necessarily happened, and they may be 2 or 3 years behind. The local municipality, as long as they can see that there is an engineer engaged for that specific scope of work, and there is progress in movement towards remediation and permit, they are very open to extending deadlines and facilitating a safe environment in order to proceed.
There also is the fact that we have some municipalities such as Boca Raton and Highland Beach that have their own Boca Raton, the 5589 statute, and their own requirements, and they have sent out dates to some of my properties. In fact, I had a report to Highland Beach due today, and I've already turned them into Boca Raton, because I guess they're going to the oldest buildings and moving it up. So for local municipalities, they will notify the ownership about when they expect you to turn in their reports.
That's interesting. So, Greg, if I'm hearing correctly and understanding correctly, a company like yourselves would be one of the first contacts for an association going through this? Are you the first in line, and then we go from there?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Ideally, we would come on site, start assessing what projects were recently completed, when the last time a paint, waterproofing, concrete repair project was done, understand more of the community, then start engaging with a structural engineer like Tim for the milestone inspection, and then likely going to a complete AEI firm like a Stantec, a Kimley Horn, a Thornton Tomasetti, that provides all of the specialities that I mentioned earlier in-house, that would be able to be a one-stop shop for a complete building review of all systems. And I'm talking everything from elevators, electrical components, bus ducts, switchgear, windows, doors, railings, the whole tutti fruit, as we say.
Sounds great. And so now for Jeff, what about the attorney? When should the association contact their counsel?
First proposals.
Yeah, right. As soon as they begin even thinking about it, let's talk about what the attorney can do early. If you involve the attorney early enough, number one, we can look through the governing documents and discuss, well, you're going to need to fund the project. How are we going to fund the project? We're going to, obviously, you can do a special assessment. Maybe sometimes it takes a vote of the owners in your governing documents. There can be workarounds for that when there is necessary and required maintenance at hand, but there is a process to follow. The attorney can provide that process, and that would then involve both Tim and Greg to get the necessary documentation put together so that essentially the board can make decisions regarding maintenance and care of the building that sometimes might be vested to the owners due to a line of cases that exist within court cases that exist within the state of Florida regarding the paramount importance of the board's responsibility for the upkeep of the building. So that is one thing. Another thing that really, really, really irks me is when irk is the wrong word. It disappoints me because the association has engaged a contractor. Jeff, we picked a contractor to do the painting, to do the roof, to do the concrete. Here's their contract. Please review it for us. Wow, that's you bring in the attorney in late in the game. If you bring the attorney in early enough, then the contract preferred by the association attorney that likely looks out for the association far more so than the contractor can be in the bid package. The contractor bids. They then provide their contract. And you're like, you bid this job with this contract, our contract. So you need to go back and put your numbers into the contract provided as part of the bid documents, not the AIA contract. Now, if you talk to a contractor's lawyer, or the AIA, they're going to tell you every reason in the world why the AIA contract is a fair contract. Well, it is fair, far more so to the contractor than the customer. And it even includes terms that you can't even get definitions for unless you subscribe to the service. So the AIA contract is not my favorite contract by any sense of the imagination. I prefer a contract that a 10th grader can read and understand. Why? Because the last thing you want is to go into a court of law on a contract dispute and then having to explain these very technical terms of art and concepts to a judge, whereas if you had a plain worded construction contract where you don't have to refer to this section, that section, this section, that section, you could have 5 or 6 different sub-referrals within a section on the AIA contract. Why isn't it all just spelled out clearly and easily for the consumer? Because the contract isn't drafted for the consumer. It's drafted for the contractor. Bring in the attorney early enough, and we can try to avoid the use of the AIA contract in favor of the attorney's preferred contract. There are so many other ways in which the attorney can help. For example, you're doing a project, has the law firm, not just the attorney, but with 21 lawyers and offices around the state. We have tremendous experience with all sorts of contractors. Have we had good experience? Have we had bad experience? Should we include various people who haven't solicited a bid? Can the attorney then suggest an additional contractor? Hey, you might want to think about talking to these people too. All kinds of benefits come from involving the attorney very early on. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish.
Jeff, I would agree with you 100%. I am a firm believer that the association should have their attorney present the contract in terms of the association. And I always say it, we working for them or they working for us. They're going to work for us. We're going to establish the criteria and then let them modify it if they don't like it, but we are going to set that course. So that's an excellent point, that the contract should always come from the association to the contractor.
Stuff. So we have a few more minutes. Let's take a few more questions. Kelly, are you able to share with some of the folks? Those questions come up not only on the questions on the registration, but we have a few in the queue here. the majority of the Milestone projects, with regards to funding, owners want to pay in full, others want to finance it. What are you seeing with properties you manage? How are these being funded on the majority?
That's a good question, and it's a varied answer, quite honestly. I mean, the current financial state of the association will play a big role in that. And then again, what do the documents allow and how can you go get that funding? And so there's multiple answers to the question. What we have started doing as a recommendation to our boards, when all this started now, I think in 2022, as we've been having the boards increase their reserve funding so that when the full requirement is in place, they're not hit with 80% increase of reserves, budgeting operationally for that SIRS reserve study, because it's different and it requires other things. So being proactive in your funding, taking a deep dive on where your financial standing is, and then talking to whatever experts, whether it be the banks, the attorney, to then plan how to get there without crushing the community as a whole.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a burden. It's a lot of, the title of this webinar is Dollars and Cents, SENSE, but we can't forget the CENTS either. It's quite a thing. So, Tim, one of the questions that's come up a few times, our condos had a 40-year inspection last year. Is something like that taken into consideration when the survey is done for what has to be done with this process?
Well, as we had talked, the previous 40-year structural inspections have followed, or this SB 4D has followed kind of those guidelines. Depends on how, if they were accepted by the municipality. That's an excellent question. Now, the municipality owns that. This is a state requirement. So I think a lot of problem that we had in Dade and Broward was we had very low quality 40-year certification reports submitted for projects that soon thereafter needed major restoration work and things of that nature. So the format for reporting this has become a lot more detailed. And I think that the question on hold would be the fact that if you got a 40-year certificate reinspection last year or 2 years ago, you need to look at it. If it is not as detailed as this new requirement is, I would go to the municipality or wherever we had to turn it in and see if they would accept it. I have not seen a requirement saying this new one supersedes it and you don't immediately have to turn it in. So I've done 40-year recertification reports that would mimic what we've done already, but there is a lot of them that are not.
Jeff, if I may, from a Collier's recommendation standpoint, in any clientele that we're representing or meeting with, if they are in Dade, Broward, and or Palm Beach counties, because a lot of folks in Palm Beach started copying just buildings out of necessity, started copying the 40-year requirements in Dade and Broward. But if you are a building out there that has recently completed a concrete resto job, a 40-year cert, like 50-year cert, like, immediately get a hold of that engineer right now, because they are the most familiar with your building, i.e. most recently completed a study on your building and a project, and get them to do that milestone yesterday, if you haven't already started it, because they may be your cheapest and quickest path to fulfilling the need of the milestone requirement, especially if they just stamped your building for a 40 or a 50 year.
Yeah, and if we need to get you back to yesterday, here's Doc Brown's time machine. I don't know if it'll work, but if you haven't gotten this going, you've got to get this going. This is important stuff, because one of the questions that came up earlier is that the deadlines, to our knowledge at this point, have not been changed whatsoever. So going back to Greg here, what are the costs? How much what I'm trying to say is project management is not something community associations enter into every day. So this question comes up a lot. How do you bill? How is it charged? How is an association?
Yeah, so Colliers, we typically work on a set fee basis.
Okay.
So, from that perspective, our team members are minimum 12 years sort of experienced in the field that are managing an asset of this type. If you can imagine, that's a 120 to 150 grand salary a year. By the time you break that out, you can figure out what they would charge on a weekly basis. So, you know, typically we don't take on an assignment. Any assignment we take on requires a minimum of at least 1 day a week of administration, right? So from that perspective, you can pretty easily figure out on a monthly rate, we'd be charging somewhere around the nature of about $10,000 for 1 day a week administration kind of deal is where the market's set at.
Okay, that provides a good basis for everybody. Thank you for that. And just want to let everybody know, we had a few hundred people here on today. We got a ton of questions. We're not going to get to all of them in the time that we have. So we will prepare a report for everybody on the panel to receive your questions. They can get back to you afterwards, and we'll have a link at the end as well. We have a few more questions we want to get to before we wrap it up and let everybody satisfy their hunger. We know it's lunchtime as well. But a big question that comes up here, people are concerned in the condominium environment. Are they going to have to come into my unit? What am I going to personally have to allow or not allow? What's going to go down? So will all doors and windows, Tim, probably this is good for you. Will all doors and windows be included or only in common areas? Does every unit need to be inspected? That's coming up quite a bit here. People are concerned. Okay.
So on the phase one, Miles, no, it's not. No, it's not. We have to take a representative sampling. I would say 25%, not cherry picking for the worst, not the best. You have to, as an engineer or an architect, you have to have a feeling that you're getting a clear representation. And so going in and looking at a unit and their windows, especially not new windows. You're more concerned with older windows than new windows. So that's kind of where it is. And then combine. And in some buildings, it may be more than 25%.
So Tim, can I throw you a caveat question to Jeff's there? What is, according to SIR or according to an engineer, what is the useful life of a window system?
I'm going to say on the ocean, maximum 40 years, 40, you know, and then inward it gets greater. But
okay, so then so leading the witness, if you will. So milestone windows are not effective, but then SIRS is going to be there's going to be a need for a likely window replacement. So then Jeff, Mr. Renbaum, bringing you in, common area. Do we have to fully assess what happens if it's owner responsibility? How do we tackle that, sir?
Well, if it is a association expense, you're going to have to first determine if the glazing is on the owner or on the association. If it's on the association, then in fact, whoever is preparing the structural integrity reserve study needs to then also include that component for in their professional opinion. What is the remaining useful life? What is the cost of replacement, et cetera, and so forth? And then you will start reserving for it.
So if you're a 35-year-old building about to go through structural integrity and milestone, would you then be budgeting for a complete window replacement? That would be pretty prudent, right?
I think it's certainly within the realm of possibility. That is for sure.
Well, let's just say we're doing that and we go into the report and we find the windows are in good condition. The older windows are in good condition. We may extend the life to 50 years. It's a judgment call. You know. Okay,
that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Windows can deteriorate after 30 years. You know, you have to determine to see how they've weathered the storm, if you will. The other aspect of that is, and I've done a lot of this with the condo docs, it says that the owner's responsibility to maintain the window. And Jeff and I have had our debates on that. Is it the financial responsibility to maintain, or the financial and the actual physical responsibility to maintain? My feeling is that the envelope of the building is a common element and it is owned by the association. The cost to maintain the open hole of Swiss cheese, as I referred to earlier, who bears that cost could be the owner. But in whole, the envelope is the associations. So I've always argued with, I've discussed with attorneys my feeling, because again, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you could have a holdout that could actually put the whole building in peril because they're not willing to pay for the window. and the maintenance, it's not really their option. The exterior is a common element of the building.
Jeff, I'd like to, with your permission, as you are moderating today, scroll some of these questions and fly some answers back to our participants who have taken the time to write them in. We haven't done that before, but I like playing Stump the Lawyer, and I think it's good as well where we can just do rapid fire. And I'm starting at the bottom, and I'm just going to scroll on up to the top and take about maybe 5-10 minutes to do that. What do you think?
Do it.
All right. So, okay. If we need to remove shutters and screens to go through the balcony concrete work, who is responsible for the cost? You know, some of these questions, I'm going to direct you back to your lawyer because they are document specific. Don't hate me for that. But the answer to this one is it is document specific. You need to go back into your governing documents, coordinate with the lawyer as to whose responsibility that will be. If you've complied with a certification already, do you still have to comply with the Milestone inspection? They are independent. The city of Boca Raton, city of Miami, Broward County, whoever it is, they have their requirements. Those are different than the state requirements. They might be duplicative, but you know, as to whether the report will stand or not is really going to be up to the municipality or the state, as the case may be. Hopefully you are dealing with an engineer that if you need to have the report mildly updated for one reason or another, you can coordinate that. Do I see a real estate exodus of unit owners due to the devaluation of properties created by the Milestone and the requirements of the Structural Integrity Reserve study? I don't think it's going to be a dire circumstance, but we are seeing voluntary terminations. We are seeing developers making contingent offers to unit owners saying, if I get this many people to agree to this sales price, then the contract goes hard, and then they would terminate the condominium, knock down, rebuild, convert it into an apartment building. Lots of options once they have it.
I think Greg
if I could just give a quick opinion here.
Yep, jump in.
Two different buildings I'm working with. One building went to the market and found financing for all of their 300 unit owners, which was at a far better rate, equivalent to a primary mortgage rate that they were able to obtain on behalf of their residents. Made it a lot easier for people to be able to pay any necessary assessments. A very different building just down the street told their unit owners to go and find their own money. Much more difficult, much more expensive for those unit owners to be able to then come up with that same $100,000, because instead of getting a primary mortgage rate at 7%, they're probably getting a personal loan at upwards of 10%. So as board presidents realize that those decisions may greatly affect your residential pool and how they're able to come up with that money.
Okay, moving on to Michael's question. Is there any relief in the bill that allows for the sale of the condominium without the required termination requirements if the reserve study amount is more than the building's market value? Interesting question, but the answer is no. There is nothing in the legislation regarding that. Can we provide a list of residential construction management companies in Palm Beach County? I can give you one better. Go to Google. They'll just put the inquiry in and you'll get quite a list. Can the town dictate recertification specs that are more stringent than the state? You bet. Let's see. Okay, I'm just sort of scrolling as quickly as I can read here. If you guys see something you want to address, please interrupt and just jump in. Can we address the rules of the association? No beer bottles in the pool area. Cute, but this is not the purpose of today's webinar, but Castle, I know, and many others have webinars dealing with those issues. Yes, not every condo uses a management company. That is true, but most have at least a private manager, and the same would apply to them as well. You should not be putting the burden of managing construction projects on your local manager without regard to whether they're using a management company or not. Greg, did you say your company, how much was it approximately? Did you say $1,000 a week for the service?
No, we typically go anywhere from about $8,000 to $10,000 a month for 1 day a week of service.
Oh, got it. Got it. Thank you. Just wanted to do some clarification on that. Anybody else scrolling have questions? Let's see. Do you want to jump in? Cracks. Here we go. Here's one for Tim. Cracks in floor slabs due to lack of expansion joints in the original construction. Is that considered a slab integrity issue?
Is that well, it depends if it's a ground floor slab or an elevated slab. A lot of different how severe the cracks are. I mean, one thing we know for sure, concrete cracks. How severe the cracks are is a huge issue.
Mm-hmm. Someone asked about windows that are, in fact, an owner responsibility. How is that going to be handled in the report? And in the structural integrity reserve study, and there could be a sideline item on it. The engineer or whoever's preparing the report can certainly document the condition and when those windows may need replacing. However, that burden was ultimately going to be passed to the owners, at least at this preliminary stage. And of course, as the legislation gets later interpreted, things can change. But if the glazing is an owner responsibility, it's an owner responsibility. If it's an association, it's the association.
I am president engineer. I don't look and see who's responsible. I'm identifying the condition. That's a secondary to identify.
Well, that's Milestone, though. But that's Milestone, right? What if it's now part? So Milestone, you're absolutely right. But what about structural integrity reserve study? You know, the association wouldn't have the duty, so to speak, if the glazing is in fact an owner responsibility. So it will be interesting. And I think different attorneys will have different answers to that. And I think we will get clarity as well from the division on those issues over time. The penalties, if the requirements are not met. Okay, if the board is ignoring the responsibilities of the required maintenance of the structural integrity reserve study of the Milestone, it is a breach of fiduciary duty. So there lies the answer to that one.
Jeff, the one thing that I don't think was addressed was the exposure of board members to civil suit.
Sure. Well, that would be the breach of fiduciary duty. And that's an intention. Basically, it amounts to something like an intentional tort, sort of like when you, if a board member, God forbid, slugs somebody. And that's an intentional tort. You're not going to have coverage under the D&O policy for that type of intentional wrong. Breach of fiduciary duty, while I don't think I've seen it happen yet. I can't recall reading any cases, but arguably, if you have a breach of fiduciary duty, that could certainly affect the pocketbook of the association and possibly even run all the way into that board member's pocketbook as well.
So if they elected not to move forward with one of the mandated functions and insurance wasn't able to be obtained or a sale wasn't able to go through, is there exposure there?
There sure could be. We're going to find out as we go through this together, because I think we'll be seeing that happen. And then we'll see where it goes from there.
So I guess penalties for not meeting the mandates are upwards and including not being able to insure your building or get sales of the units in your building, right?
Well, right. And in fact, it gets worse because some of the insurance companies are requiring, if your roof has a 30-year life to it, but it's greater than 15 years old, there are insurance companies refusing to provide coverage right now.
I believe that's happening on Miami Beach quite a bit.
Yeah, and
right
they're
now.
good. They're asking for copies of the reports.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, I had an issue with my personal property. I have a metal roof. Looks just like barrel S tile. If you were standing at the street, you'd never know the difference. 18 years old, I had to jump through hoops to get insurance because it was greater than 15 years. Yeah, and I still have quite a bit of life left in that roof. So it is interesting for sure. Will flood insurance be required for property not in a flood zone? Great question. I'm going to give you an answer because I had to do a research project as a young attorney that stuck with me. Greater than 1/2 of all the floods in the United States occur outside of the designated flood zones. If that's not scary enough to get you to buy flood insurance, I don't know what will. So the fact that you're not in a flood zone living in the state of Florida, to me, is meaningless. We are all living on drained swamp land. Let that sink in, especially down here in South Florida. Drained swamp land, intentionally drained swamp land.
Did you intentionally say let that sink in, pun intended?
Oh, good. No, I didn't intentionally do it. I'm innocent on that one. That was good. I'll take the pun though.
Let's do one more because I know we're a little bit past our time. One more question.
Past our time? Let's see. Does it mean our emails to Tallahassee regarding the other bills that ultimately everything got merged into Senate Bill 154? Does that mean it was worthless? Gosh, no. Now you want to change your attention to address Senate Bill 154, but everybody who provided comment regarding all the other bills that were out there regarding the structural integrity reserve study and milestones had an impact in the creation of and revisions to Senate Bill 154 as it wound its way through the committee process.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Now, earlier, Eric Malloy, is he coming back? There he is. Eric, take it away, my friend.
All right, so we've added the Q&A. So we have a link that's prepared for anyone. You can email us. I know we had a lot of questions today that we were not able to get to, but we wanted to make sure that with the topic that the presenters had enough time. So we do apologize if we didn't get to your questions, but please feel free to submit them. You can either submit them to, and the information is here on the screen right now, info@castlegroup.com, or we provided another link here for floridalawservices.com/2023 March 21st. And we'll make sure that any questions you have for a specific presenter is forwarded to them for their response. And we may even have a little bit of a discussion here with the panelists and see if we need to do a part 2 or follow-up. So if we do, yes.
Full disclosure, oftentimes some of the questions come in are very uniquely specific due to the declaration. And you can't, just to the owners and board members, managers, everybody who's watching today, the opportunity to ask questions is more of a general nature, but you might be referred back to the requisite experts at your association in order to answer that specific question. So we're not being rude sometimes by not answering or not addressing, but sometimes you need the attorney of the association as well, not just a general answer.
Correct. Thank you, Jeff. So we will be following up and seeing. We're going to try to rush because the information that Jeff presented today was fresh right off the presses, 48 hours. So we're going to look to try to get this out and edited so that you guys can review and then send to anyone on your associations or friends list that may be interested in the topic. So we will be blasting this out for anyone that was in attendance today with a link to review the content. I do want to thank everyone for attending today. I want to thank our presenters for their time. This was a rousing discussion. We did have a lot of attendees on the show, on the webinar today. So great information all around.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
you.